Good morning, teachers. Today, we'll explore a new review methodology. In one or other subjects, you're required to do research, isn't it? Question: how did you do your research? Well, the answer is it varies from individual to individual. There are testimonies that they copy and paste, and that's it. Well, many do research and synthesize these different articles and produce the required output. So this morning we'll take up scoping review methodology. So let's begin. Today we'll take up scoping review for undergraduate education students. So this is for you, my dear students. So approaches to scoping review. And what are the major steps of a scoping review? So let's begin. Types of review research. This varies according to the chart. This varies according to level of confidence. Okay, so the lowest part in this diagram is the narrative review. And I think we're quite familiar with this. Next to it is scoping review on the progression. Another is rapid evidence assessment, full systematic review, and meta-analysis. Among these different review research protocol, the highest confidence ranges in full systematic and meta-analysis. But today, of course, we'll take up a new review methodology, which is the scoping review. Let's continue. So, how do we do scoping review? What do we get from scoping review? Okay, so as according to authors, scoping review is an exploratory research project that systematically map the literature available on the topic. Say, for example, science teaching. So, what are the available literatures on that particular topic? Identify key concepts, theories, or sources of evidence, and more importantly, gaps in educational research. So this will help us identify what are areas in educational research that need to be done. So we can do scoping review for that. It also assesses the extent of research available by mapping the literature to summarize the evidence, inform future research, and identify or address knowledge gap. So this is the purpose of scoping review. We look at the extent of research, for example, strategies of teaching science. So we'll summarize the evidence, how science is taught, whether or not we transition from teacher to learner centered. What has been done in that particular topic? What are the things that need to be done? Scoping review poses questions needing answers, like what information has been presented on pedagogy of teaching science? So the strength of scoping review is basically related to earlier mentioned. It identifies and analyzes knowledge gap. So this talks about what has been done and what are the things that need to be done. Again, on pedagogy of teaching science, we can identify what are the prevailing or the trend of strategies in teaching science. We can do that in scoping review. Interesting, di ba? It provides starting point for the size and sources of literature. Yes, especially for emerging area of research. Serve as precursor to a more systematic review. If you recall on that diagram, scoping review, next full systematic review. This will inform that there are, as a result of the scoping review, it will tell us that there are available studies that can be reviewed more systematically. This is less resource intensive than other types because we will scan the different databases and synthesize. It doesn't require that much of mathematical or statistical concepts. Can focus on how terms are used in literature. There are some terms which are ambiguous, like for example, blended learning on a physical setting or face-to-face setting might be different with blended learning on an online classroom. So how is blended learning used in a face-to-face setting and blended learning in an online setting? We can do that. It can identify basic issues, documents, or directives that guide in developing or evaluating policy and practice. Well, policy are for educational managers. I think what concern us most as teachers, we look at on the practices, issues on using certain pedagogy in science, issues on certain academic performance, issues on certain intervention. We can do that in scoping review. It examine how research is conducted. Yeah, yes. So these are methodological aspect, as you can recall in the reflective practice. How teaching strategies are studied over time. So methodological. Well, if there are strengths, there are also weaknesses. Depending on the criteria, later on we'll talk about criteria, does not necessarily appraise the quality of evidence. In as much as it can determine according to the research question, then it's fine. Well, it does not synthesize results. This is related to item number two. It does not dig much on what works on a certain article. Scoping reviews, usually we use the term indicates and suggests. It is not definite and it is not prescriptive. What are the steps? How to do scoping review? According to RC and Amali, there are 5 steps in doing scoping review. This is the landmark paper in scoping review. Okay, first identify a research question in your interest, topic interest. Like for example, if you are dealing with um, strategies of teaching science, what are questions that you would like to ask in order to understand more about strategies for science? If you have the question, it's time to search literature. Important here is that you have searched key terms. Later on, this will be illustrated and we'll do a demonstration. Third, select the studies that are relevant to the questions. Here we will discuss inclusion and exclusion criteria. Fourth, chart the data. This is now the time that you get to the meat of that articles. what are information available on and relevant from those studies according to your research question. This is where the bulk of the task is devoted. Finally, collate, summarize, and report the results. So this is now the discussion part. And optional, we consult stakeholders if available. Those groups appropriate for the topic. Since we are in the teaching field, so teachers, students, family, policymakers, our management, things that these are our stakeholders. So let's talk about the first step. Identify the research question. Okay, so these steps is clarifying and linking the purpose and research question. You need to think of what is that particular topic that you're interested. For example, this is the study of Plaharty and Phillips 2015. He's interested in flipped classroom in higher education. So he dig on flipped classroom and higher education. Question number one, there were, I think, 4 or 5 questions in this article. Question one, what technologies are being used to engage students in the flipped classroom? So if you're familiar with flipped classroom, it integrates technology with it. So first question, what technology? Another possible topic is, I mentioned this, strategies in teaching high school science. What are the strategies in teaching high school science? So you can identify, according to published research, the strategies available. Clarity in the review questions, reminders. Clarity in the review question assists in developing the protocol, facilitates effectiveness in literature search, and provide a clear structure for development of the report. Since this is the starting point of your research, you need to be sure about your research questions. You can examine the example earlier. It's directly related to the topic at hand. You can have major question and sub questions. Like for example, strategies in teaching high school. What are strategies? You can have teacher-centered strategies. You can have learner-centered strategies as sub questions. You can do that. This is to provide how evidence is to be mapped. So the research question will tell you what are the things that you need to find in these different articles available. Okay, so moving on, the second step, I think we are familiar. We do this often, especially among you digital natives. Literature search. How did you search the literature? I think most of us are familiar with Google Scholar and other databases. Here, we need a relevant search engine. So, this is very comprehensive. Identify published and unpublished primary studies. It's your decision if you include unpublished studies. But we usually recommend those that are published and peer-reviewed. Search for all sources of evidence. Search strategy will be iterative, paulit-ulit. So, how do you search? What are the key terms you can change as you go along? Okay, sensitivity of search strategy is the key here. For example, in the article of Flaherty and Phillips, keyword, search keyword, higher education or tertiary or active learning or blended learning. Since flipped classroom in higher education is the topic, so higher education or tertiary, they mean the same thing, but they might be written on different article that way. Blended learning, active learning, these are flipped classroom characteristic. Okay, study selection, inclusion and exclusion criteria. They serve as basis on which sources will be considered for inclusion, which articles are included uh, in the analysis. Okay, so types of sources can include any existing literature, but we generally encourage to find those peer-reviewed articles. Okay, so study selection can be like this. This include time period. Look at this leftmost part, criterion. It can include time period, language, study focus, literature focus, population. The minimum criterion should be PCC, population, concept, context. In this example, I think we have here this the minimum consideration for inclusion exclusion criteria. Chart the data. You can do this. Okay, so provides logical and descriptive summary of the results that aligns with objective and questions. So you can do this. First column will be for author. Second column is with intervention. If the study calls for intervention, participant sample. I think the last part there is the outcome. Depende sa objective outcome. Okay? Develop draft charting table. You have to do this or a form at the protocol stage to record key information. So if you look at the example here, so as I've said, author, setting, outcome, design. It can be an iterative process. It can be continually updated. Trial the extraction form on 2 or 3 studies to ensure all relevant results are extracted. Summarize results. So results may be presented as a map of data extracted. It can also be in a diagrammatic or tabular form and or in a descriptive format. We usually do the descriptive format. Okay, so narrative summary should accompany the tabulated and or charted result. It's important to discuss. This should describe how results are related to the review objective and questions. For example, what are the common teaching strategies and methods used in a curriculum design using spiral progression approach? Findings says like this. Studies on science subjects disclose that discovery approach, inquiry learning, collaborative, cooperative learning, and experiential learning are the teaching strategies employed in the context of spiral progression.